They always tell you that marrying into the 1% is like winning the lottery. They show you the yachts, the private islands, and the 6-carat diamonds that catch the light so perfectly, you forget they're basically handcuffs. I believed the fairy tale. I really did. Julian Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. He was the man who saw me when I was a nobody, curating art in a dusty Soho basement. He swept me off my feet and into a life of absolute, suffocating luxury. But here's the thing about old money and deep pockets. They can buy a lot of silence. They can buy entire zip codes, private security teams, and as I found out last night, they can buy a second life. I'm sitting here in our Connecticut estate, a place that has 34 rooms I've never even stepped foot in. I used to joke that we could lose a whole person in this house and not find them for weeks. Last night, at 3:14 a.m., I realized that wasn't a joke. I found the keys to the West Wing. Part of the property Julian told me was structurally unsound and filled with black mold. I didn't find mold. I found a woman. I found a life that looked exactly like mine, but 10 years older. I found Julian's second wife. And the most terrifying part, she didn't even know I existed.
Let's dial it back for a second so you understand how we got here. My name is Elena. 3 years ago, I was living on ramen and passion, trying to make it in the New York art world. Then I met Julian at a gala. He was everything the magazine said. Brilliant, calculated, and devastatingly handsome. When he proposed 6 months later, it felt like the universe was finally paying me back for years of struggle. We moved to the Thorne estate in Greenwich. It's a fortress of limestone and glass. Julian is a legacy tech mogul. He's always on. If he isn't in Tokyo, he's in London. If he isn't in London, he's in a bunker-like home office that requires a retinal scan. I grew used to the solitude. I traded my friends for society luncheons and my career for managing the household. But luxury has a way of numbing your instincts. You stop questioning why your husband has 3 separate phones. You stop wondering why the gardener looks at you with pity instead of respect. I thought I was the queen of the castle. I didn't realize I was just the latest acquisition in a very long, very dark collection. Julian is obsessed with perfection. He doesn't just want a wife, he wants a specific type of woman, a specific era of a woman. And once that era ends, well, that's where the West Wing comes in.
The cracks started appearing about a month ago. It was something small, it always is. I was looking for a misplaced pearl earring in Julian's dressing room when I found a dry cleaning slip for a dress I'd never seen. It was a vintage-style tea dress, silk, in a shade of emerald green that I've always hated. I checked the size. It was a 4. I'm a 2. At dinner that night, I mentioned it casually. Hey, Jules, I think the dry cleaner swapped some of our stuff. I got a green dress back that isn't mine. The air in the room didn't just get cold, it froze. Julian didn't even look up from his steak. He just said, I'll handle it, Elena. Stick to the gallery openings and leave the household logistics to the staff. A week later, I smelled it. Jasmine. A heavy floral perfume that smelled like the 1990s. I don't wear perfume. I have sensitive skin. But when Julian came home from one of his late nights at the office, he didn't smell like mahogany and expensive gin. He smelled like jasmine. I'm not a jealous woman by nature, but I am an observant one. I started watching the staff. I noticed that every afternoon at 4 p.m., a tray of tea and fresh scones would leave the kitchen. Not for me, I was usually at the gym. And not for Julian, he was in the city. The maid, Mrs. Gable, would carry it toward the north corridor, through the heavy oak doors that lead to the West Wing. The doors that were supposed to be locked. The doors that supposedly led to a construction zone. The curiosity became a physical weight in my chest. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I waited for Julian to leave for his quarterly retreat in Aspen. As soon as his Gulfstream cleared the runway at Teterboro, I went to work. I've lived in this house for years, but I'd never touched the West Wing doors. They were the only part of the house still using old-fashioned skeleton keys. I spent 2 hours in the basement archives until I found a rusted ring of keys labeled the Annex. The door creaked, a sound that felt like a scream in the silent house. I expected dust. I expected cobwebs and boxes of old tax returns. Instead, I stepped onto a plush, cream-colored carpet. The air was warm. It smelled like home, but not my home. As I walked down the hallway, my heart was hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. The walls were lined with photos, not of Julian's family, not of his business achievements. They were photos of a woman. She had my hair. She had my smile. The photos were dated 2012, 2014, 2018. I reached the end of the hall and pushed open a pair of French doors. Her name was Sarah. She was Julian's wife from 12 years ago. The world thinks she's living in a private villa in the south of France after a harrowing divorce. That's what the tabloids said. That's what the NDA she signed probably says too. But Julian didn't want a divorce. He wanted to preserve her. See, Julian has this sickness, this God complex. He falls in love with a version of a woman. And when she starts to age, when she starts to develop her own opinions or deviate from the script he wrote for her, he replaces her in the public eye. But he's too possessive to let the old version go. So he keeps them, like vintage cars, like artifacts. Sarah told me everything. She told me about the third wife who lives in a penthouse in London, about how Julian uses his wealth to create these gilded bubbles where time doesn't move. He pays for their lives, their clothes, their medical bills, as long as they stay in their assigned wing and pretend they are still the woman he met a decade ago. "Why don't you leave?" I asked her, my voice trembling. She looked at me with a sadness so profound it made my blood run cold. With what money? I didn't have time to process Sarah's warning because the heavy front doors of the estate slammed shut. Julian was home. He wasn't in Aspen, it was a trap. He'd been tracking the biometric locks on the basement archives. He knew exactly where I was. I heard his footsteps, slow, methodical, echoing on the hardwood. Sarah grabbed my hand. "Hide," she hissed, pointing toward a heavy velvet curtain. Ducked behind the fabric just as Julian entered the sunroom. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was the most terrifying thing I've ever heard. It wasn't angry. It was disappointed. "You've been hosting a guest. That's a violation of our agreement." "She's just a girl, Julian," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Let her go." "I can't do that," Julian replied. I could hear him pouring a drink, the clink of ice against crystal. "Elena was doing so well. She was the perfect curation. But she's always been too curious. It's that gallery girl instinct. She just has to look behind the canvas." He walked over to the curtain. I could see the shadow of his handmade Italian loafers underneath. He pulled the fabric back with a violent jerk. His eyes were like flint. No love, no warmth, just the cold calculation of a man looking at a broken piece of machinery. "I spent $12 million on your brand, Elena," he said softly. "The wedding, the charities, the public image. Do you have any idea how much work it is to replace a wife in the public eye? The paperwork, the PR? It's exhausting. I was hoping you'd last at least 5 more years before I had to move you over here with Sarah."
That was the moment I realized I wasn't his wife. I was his content. I was a project he was tired of managing. He didn't lock me in a room that night. He didn't have to. He just sat me down and showed me a folder. It contained photos of my family, my sister in Ohio, my parents. He showed me evidence of a drug habit I didn't have, and a series of fabricated bank transfers that made it look like I was embezzling from his charity. "You can leave," he told me, sliding a pen across the table. "You can walk out right now. But by the time you reach the gate, your sister will lose her job, your father's medical insurance will be canceled, and the police will be at your door with a warrant for your arrest. Or you can stay. You can have the West Wing, you can have the emerald dresses and the jasmine perfume.
you can be taken care of forever. He thought he had me. He thought the money was a net I couldn't cut through. But Julian forgot one thing. I was a curator. I knew how to spot a fake, and I knew how to destroy one. I had been recording the entire conversation on my phone, synced to a cloud drive he didn't know about. I also had the photos Sarah gave me, the ones of his collection. I looked him in the eye and told him, if I don't check in with my lawyer in 60 minutes, the Thorne Legacy goes live on every major news outlet in the country. I don't want your money, Julian. I want my life back.
Because some happily ever afters are just high-end prisons with a very expensive coat of paint. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.